Miss Meyer for another episode of the Miss Meyer Show. So right now we are going to be talking about Chapter 3, Part 1 for this week. So I'm using my physical book. Remember, you have a virtual one, so don't get confused. You're going to be starting with page 88 in your textbook, and we're going to start about French Louisiana and those kinds of areas, and just like the early exploration and all the European explorers who came over to Louisiana. So when I want to begin, I want to go over and just reiterate what we learned last week. Remember, we learned that the Native Americans were first here in what would become Louisiana. They had already inhabited large areas of the state, all throughout different places. Wherever you are in Louisiana, there was a tribe, a Native American, early, inhabitant tribe that was there before you, and so you had that there. Now, as Columbus has now, at this time what we're talking about here, Columbus has set sail to find and found a new world. And in all fact, Columbus didn't find anything. He ran into some land that he didn't even realize was not India, and said that it was the Americans, and called the people that were here Indians, because he thought he was running straight into India. His purpose was to find a quicker route to India to go get, materials, spices, things like that, and to bring it back to Spain. Columbus himself was Portuguese. So he, being such a great navigational leader, didn't know about the huge landmass that was North America. So he thought, rather than having to sail, they were in Europe, all the way down and around and all these kind of things that were taking a really long time to get to the Indies and India and things like that, he could just go straight across and he would hit India a lot faster. Well, he didn't know about the United States, but he didn't know about North America and all that places. So when he ran into it, he was like, man, I got here fast. That was the best shortcut I've ever done. And then when he really believed he was in India, and so he called the Native Americans that he found there Indians, and that's why they're called that way. But it was a misconception from Columbus, who didn't know what he was doing. So that's why they're called. Some people will mistakenly refer to Native Americans as Indians, because they're not. They're Native Americans. Indians live in India, and India is in Asia. So that's just kind of like continents. Remember, we learned our cute little song and all that kind of cool stuff. So now that Columbus has done that, that opened up a whole new world for all these major countries to come and to try to establish colonies over in the, North America kind of way. It was kind of like MySpace. When MySpace, y'all, I don't know, you're probably babies when MySpace came out, but when MySpace came out, it was like, wow, everybody was going crazy. It was like everybody wanted to get on it, everybody wanted to share and post things to the walls, all this kind of stuff. And after MySpace came Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. So now all these people are kind of banking on and off of MySpace's success. The same thing was going on with the European explorers. So they were all banking off of Columbus's success. They were saying, hey, this guy's found this huge piece of land over here. And he stuck his claim for Spain. When he got there, he was like, I claim this land for Spain. So at this time, there were 3 major Mamma Jamma countries that were out there. Huge countries. They weren't even really countries. They were empires, okay? An empire is like huge, just colossal groupings of land, people, whatever. And they were Spain, France, and England. These were your 2 giant empires that were out there, and they were trying to basically control the whole world. It was all about these big giant empires. So now that Spain had come over here into the North America, and they've claimed it for, that little part, for Spain, England and France said, hey, don't leave us out. We want to come. We want some of this land. We want a piece of the action, okay? So they started sending people over. Now, in the beginning, a lot of it, as we saw, when we learn about the original 13 colonies and things like that, we do see that a lot of people do end up in those first 13 original colonies and things like that. That's when they're coming over. That's later on. But in the early stages, they were coming in and through and they would run right into this area of kind of like the southeastern part of the United States. So the first person who kind of really came here, we talked about it. Well, let's see. Actually, first, let's talk about just some of the people. What were the reasons why they wanted to start a colony here? They didn't want to just come here and explore. And they didn't think it would be any big deal about just sticking, and saying, hey, I claim this for Spain, or I claim this for France, or I claim this for England. Because anybody could do that unless you have a colony there with people and supplies and fortresses and things like that. It doesn't matter what you say, who owns it, unless you have people there to protect it. It's open. It's like way open, okay? It's kind of like, okay, you want to, like, if I go to the airport, it drives me crazy that people do this. I'm like, are you crazy? People will leave valuable items. Like, we were sitting in the chairs to get on the plane. We're waiting, I guess, the gate area, and people will just get up and go here and go there and leave their purses and their laptops. I'm like, they are the most trusting people in the world. Now me, I'm like, I would never do that. I don't trust anybody like that. But you see, I know that by leaving it there without somebody there to watch it or to make sure anything happens to it, it's very more than, you have a good chance of getting it stolen if there's no one there to watch it, make sure it doesn't get stolen. The same thing's going on here, but just in a different way. They could claim they own this land and this property. They could claim they owned anything. They could do anything. But unless they had something there to protect it and to say, don't take this, this is mine, nothing, it would go away. It's kind of like this. Think about this, another example. I'm the queen of examples. On Halloween, when you go trick-or-treating, and no, Joe, I'll say you don't go trick-or-treating because I know y'all trick-or-treat still. I trick-or-treat with my kids, but I trick-or-treated myself until I was like 14 years old. It's kind of scary, but I did. But anyway, so if you go up to a house, and the house, somebody, you ring the doorbell, you say trick-or-treat, and they come out and they give you one little piece of candy. Now, if they instead, which I don't know, people just blow me away. I don't do this because they're gonna be gone. So somebody, they're not home, but they leave a big bucket out of candy and it says, please take one. Are you kidding me? All right, when I was a kid, and now I'm not saying to do this, I'm just giving you an example of my poor judgment. If someone did that, we were dumping that whole bowl in our bag. We're like, I just took one whole bowl. So the early European explorers, they needed to establish some type of protective barrier against each other because these three empires were so cutthroat. They wanted to rule the world. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to have big empires everywhere. And they were always trying to one up the next person. So England was they had sent John Cabot. This guy. He was one of the first guys that had come here. And they sent him to find a shorter route to Asia. They said, hey, Columbus found this short route to Asia and he landed in this area. So we want you to do the same thing. Okay, so when he did come to that short route of Asia, he kind of sailed close to what is modern day Maryland. And he was the one to really kind of establish those area that would be known as the 13 original colonies. He was the one that said, hey, I'm going to claim this area for England. And that's why we see huge English involvement in those 13 original colonies until the American Revolution. When the American Revolution happened, the United States was not a United States, obviously, back then. But when the revolution happened, the South, what we know as Florida, Louisiana, parts of, even Texas, Arkansas, that was owned by France and Spain and Mexico. We had this was all area that was owned, well, pretty much Spain, not Mexico yet. So this whole area in the American Revolution of where we are in Louisiana was owned by Spain. And then essentially, well, it was Spain first. No, it was French, then Spanish, then French. We're going to go through it, but I'm going to tell you how. So during the American Revolution, Louisiana was not part of the whole revolution. Yes, we sent people to go and aid them, but we were under Spanish control at that time. Okay? So Cabot goes and he claims all that New England kind of area for England. And France and Spain, they say, okay, well, England's a bad mamma jamma. And so they don't want to go and mess with England. So like, well, where can we go and we can land that we can claim areas for our places too? Well, Spain already had a part of kind of right off the coast of Florida, those kind of places. They didn't. So France wanted to find somewhere very profitable as well. Now, France at this time already had several very, very good money making, and that's lucrative. That means that that's your big person word. That means big time profits. Lucrative. That's a cute word. I think I'm going to use that. That's going to be our code word. Lucrative. I'll put that down here. Lucrative. So when France had all of these colonies, and they were fur trading colonies, and they had them up in Canada. So they knew that there was this in Canada after they came out. There was a large river that ran through to some unknown region. They didn't know where it went, but they knew that this river was going to have a huge significance. And we'll talk about that in a second. Hint, hint, it's the Mississippi River. So France came over and they formed their first permanent settlement. And where they formed it was, we're talking about, well, we talked about the Canada part. Okay, I don't know why it's in that. I'm going to have to go back and take all this. Spain was the first European power to establish colonies over here in this whole New World area that Columbus had discovered. And where they kind of were in the, about around Florida, somewhere around St. Augustine. And that was the first place that they claimed for France in this whole, North American kind of area. They called it La Florida. That's why, and guess what? That's why it's called Florida today in the state. They claimed a lot of land around that area, and as we'll see, that whole area of Florida and just little bits of what is now Georgia and even parts into what would be known as Mississippi were all under Spanish control. Okay, so they were the ones that had that whole area. It was Spain. Spain had that whole area about Florida. Next comes the big area of the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, okay? And that's where France stakes its claim. So we have England, that's around the eastern seaboard. You got your 13 original colonies, all that's controlled by England. We've got Florida and the areas around that, a little bit going into Georgia and some Mississippi, all the places. That's Spain. And then we have the area which is today Louisiana, and even a little bit part of Mississippi, and a little bit stretching over to Texas. But at that time, that was claimed by France. So you had these three major empires right next to each other, kind of existing and trying to make it in this new world. Now, what the European explorers did not seem to consider was that this land had already been inhabited for hundreds of years by numerous tribes and early inhabitants and Native Americans. So when they came here, they brought with them a very unsavory amount of things that the Native Americans and the early inhabitants of Louisiana had no understanding about. The first one was obviously that these people were different, that they looked different than they did. They had different mannerisms. They were, fair skin and light eyes and blonde hair, red hair, things that they had never seen before. It was a whole nother way of person. Then they dressed differently. They wore all these weird clothing and things like that the early inhabitants said, why are you wearing this? It makes no sense. And also they didn't understand the weaponry that they had. Not a majority of the European explorers over here to North America had not come in peace, and they believed that they didn't care who was living here before because it was now theirs. So it didn't matter what tribe, how long you've been there, whatever, they were going to take it. And if you weren't going to give it to them, they were going to forcefully take it. Now, this was an issue, especially for, tribes that were kind of peaceful and not, hugely militaristic and those kinds of things. because their weaponry, the European explorers' weaponry, was something that they had never, ever seen before. And those were guns, cannons, bayonet swords, things like that. They had no idea what these weapons were. And in fact, many of them saw the guns with the bullets coming out as some really just crazy tool that would blow fire. They just were scared. They didn't have anything knowledge of it whatsoever. So their defense mechanisms, spears, rocks, whatever, was no way a match for the firearms that the European explorers had. They were no match for them. I mean, you put a gun next to a rock. Come on, which one? But that wasn't the biggest thing the biggest thing, is this recording? I can't see this stupid Facebook thing. Yes. The biggest thing they were impacted by was the disease. The Europeans brought over with them so much disease that these Native Americans had no way to fight. They did not have the built-up immunity. They just didn't. And we're going to talk about how gross the Europeans were coming down here compared to the Native Americans. So when they came here, these European explorers came here and they were full of just yuck and disease and gross behavior and terrible personal hygiene. The Native Americans were dropping by the numbers. I mean, they couldn't take it. There was no way that they could stand up to the diseases. They could handle, maybe they would get to where they could fight back some kind of way with, the guns and things like that. But there was no way that they could take on the diseases that came with the Europeans because they had never seen it before. They had no way of protecting themselves, and people were dropping like flies. It was kind of like if you ever watched The Walking Dead, they don't know what caused the walkers to have whatever they've got. But once it happened, it just spread and all kind of people are dead. That's what happened with these Europeans because they were so immune. They're little immune system. They're like a newborn baby. When you get your baby, if any of you have little brothers or sisters or little cousins or whatever, and you go see the baby, most of the time the mom is going to say, wash your hands before you touch the baby. Wash your hands. Don't kiss that baby. Don't you touch that baby. Because the baby's immune system is so fragile that any little thing could make that baby very, very sick. And that was the same thing that was happening to the early, inhabitants and the Native Americans that were here. Not only in the, in the European, the New England colony area or in Florida, but also in Louisiana. Now, Louisiana is as good as it gets. So these Europeans, a lot of them were coming over here to Louisiana and they were giving all the Native Americans these diseases that they had never heard of. But guess what they were getting once they landed in Louisiana? They were getting diseases like cholera and they were getting dysentery and they were dying because of the mosquitoes and all the things that came here. So both sets of people were just dropping off right and left because they could not take the element of Louisiana for the European explorers, and the Native Americans could not take the diseases of the explorers. So they were just dropping like flies. Now, moving on. Now we hear a big famous name. I'm sure you've heard about it in American history a lot of times. I'm sure you've had, but you're going to hear it again. And it's Hernando de Soto. Hernando de Soto. Now, Hernando de Soto was the first, he's known as, there are others that have come before him, but Hernando de Soto is known as the first European to explore the interior of North America. Like I said, there were more before him, but he's the first one to be given the most credit, basically. And De Soto was not some kind of, just explorer, like westward. Oh, this guy was, relentless. He was a conquistador. And what a conquistador was, is they would go and conquer other communities and other places. And when you conquer them, it's like taking them over. If you ever play Clash of Clans or whatever, my husband plays that game. But it drives me crazy. He's not allowed to buy purchases on that game anymore. But I think we talked about that in class. How I've used the primary document of my app buying history to see how much money he spent on that game. But anyway, so when you play Clash of Clans or even Risk, which I love Risk, it's one of my favorite games. You know that in order to conquer a group of people, you have to kind of battle them for it. So De Soto was a conquistador. So when he came over to this whole area of North America and the interior of our continent, he came because he meant business. And he was going to conquer this place. He wasn't going to sit around and say, oh, I'm just observing. Don't pay attention to me. He was going to come here, explore it, and he was going to take what he wanted from here. And what he did exactly like that. He and his men, De Soto's men, his fellow conquistadors, they came and they just plunged through North America, taking whatever they wanted, killing people, taking their supplies, decimating villages, enslaving people to bring back to Spain. They were doing everything, destroying houses, burning them with people inside, things like that. It was just awful. They took what they wanted and they went back. That's what is a conquistador, conquering that something. So it was not a friendly takeover. So the Native Americans in these early inhabitants of Louisiana, the whole view that they're getting of European people are that they're here to take everything. They're here to kill us. They're here to take our land. They're here to steal what's ours. They're here to murder our families. So now when they start seeing more Europeans coming over, and some of them that were not maybe as brutal as the early conquistadors and the early conquerors and explorers, the Native Americans kind of viewed everybody by that image. And it was, just not always true. So kind of like, say you were bit by a dog when you were little, okay? Say you just like some dog bit you when you're little. And now that you're, older, you're afraid of dogs. But not all dogs are dogs that are gonna bite you. My personal Labrador, before he died, my beastie boy, I know, he was 12. We still talk about him. But anyway, he would have licked you to death. You come in my house, he'd try to break in, he'd be like, let's go play. But you don't have to be afraid of all dogs. But because of your earlier exposure to a dog that was violent and vicious towards you, you are now kind of have this preconceived notion that all dogs are going to do that. Well, the Native Americans believe that as well. They had such a negative view of the European explorer because of what had happened with the earlier European explorers, that when explorers started to come here and they weren't here to kind of wipe them out or do anything like that, they didn't understand because their whole view was that everyone is like this. Okay? And we see problems of that happening when we start to bring more people over in Louisiana and, other areas around the North America. Well, De Soto, he did kind of, I guess, get what was coming to him, and he died of yellow fever. And and his men, when he died, they wrapped him up in a big blanket, tied a bunch of weights to him, and threw him in the Mississippi River. So that's the end of Hernando de Soto. So, but now Spain had a good big area that was over for them to claim. England had a great big area for them to claim. That leaves out the third super powerful empire, France. Now, France, that is why we are so French in Louisiana. When you think about everything, we do have a bit of a Hispanic culture, and New Orleans is a whole world of its own. But in the majority of Louisiana, it is predominantly French. I mean, we have French names, we have parishes instead of counties. We have, think of the dinners and the food that we cook. Our football team has a fleur-de-lis, we're called New Orleans, Louisiane. Anything that we have, it's very, very, very French. And that's because we were first colonized massively by the French. Now, the French sent this guy, they wanted to spread Christianity. That was their whole MO. MO means main operative, of why they were coming around to form these colonies. Now, I didn't get to tell you that, but we'll go over that in class, the reasons for starting a colony. The reasons are, I'm going to give you a brief thing. They were to find money, find silver and gold, to be able to refine raw materials and bring them back to their, specific empire and make some money on it. New routes and new markets to go and trade goods and things like that. And it was to spread religion. Now, Hernando de Soto and John Cabot and I think we've got a couple other ones in the early ones, but we've got Hernando de Soto and John Cabot. They were there to kind of get money, get raw materials, and to find new routes and markets. France, on the other hand, had said that they were coming to spread Christianity. That's what they were going to do. So two people that came was a priest. His name was Father Jacques Marquette. Okay, how many Marquettes do we know? Have you ever heard that last name? Come on. And a Frenchman named Louis Joly. Okay, that was his name. These were the names. And you can hear those names, and you might know someone with that name or a place of that name or anything like that. So they came, and they were the first French kind of official explorers, and they traveled along the Mississippi River. And they said, wow, this is a really cool thing. Now remember, France had claim over in Canada, so they knew that there was a river that kind of flowed down. They didn't know where it went. Now, Father Jacques and Louis Joly were not necessarily huge explorers. That wasn't what they were coming here to do. They were there to spread the faith. So they needed to have a true explorer come over here and to find somewhere around this Mississippi River where they could set up a huge colony for France. Okay? So down comes René Robert Cavelier de La Salle. Now, La Salle, he is very, not knowledgeable about exploring either. Was raised, he's kind of like he's got like big poofy hair, very like Marie Antoinette type of area, okay? But before Marie Antoinette, but a part of that whole Regency kind of thing in France. So he comes over, he's an explorer, he's got a bunch of ships. He comes and he searches for the mouth of this Mississippi. They call him up and they say, hey, La Salle, we know they've got this huge river and we need to know where it ends up. It starts up here. We know that it's down here. We know it goes farther down, but we don't know where. So your job is to find it and to establish a colony there. So La Salle is like, ay, Capitan, and he's going around to go and find it. Well, he finds it. So amazingly, he finds it. And he's so excited. So he gets off, and it's around, I can't think of the picture. We'll get to the picture. It's page 96. So he comes and he lands in an area that is pretty much at the mouth of the Mississippi River. It was where modern day Plaquemines is. So down by Chalmatians, virtual high five. So he lands there, and what he does is he sets up this big cross. He puts this big cross on the ground, and he says, I claim this land for King Louis, and I name it in his honor of him, he and his queen, Louisiane. That's how they called it, because it was for both of them. So when he had done that, he said, I claim all this for France. Well, he went and he kind of claimed it there, but he didn't have enough supplies to really establish a successful colony. He was not at all prepared. He was not prepared for the climate or the animals or diseases or all that kind of stuff. So he's like, look, we got to go back to France, and we're going to come back and we're going to set all this colony up. So he left a few guys there, but he took the majority of them with him back to France. He goes back to France. He tells King Louis, guess what? I found it. Who's the man? Who's the man? And King Louis says, oh, wonderful, wonderful. And he gives him all these supplies and ships and other ships to take with him and people and material, all this kind of stuff. And La Salle thinks he is hot stuff. He's like, I'm the man, I'm the man, I'm the man. You know the song by Aloe Blanc? I know that one. I know. I usually don't know new music. That's not really new music, but I do know that one. So anyway, So he comes on, he's got his ship, and he's like, I'm going back because I found the land before any of y'all did. I found it first. So he's going to go back to where he left those men and just to successfully set up a true colony for France. Well, this is before navigation systems are intact. In fact, I was telling my husband the other day, I said, do you remember when we would have to rely on actual maps, like physical maps, to get to point A to point B? I was always lost, always, could never figure out where to go. So the GPS technology was like mind-blowing. It opened up a whole new world to me because I would never go anywhere because I knew, not outside of New Orleans, because I was never going to get anywhere. I'd be lost. So GPS is like, woo, amazing tool for me. But this is before this had happened. So they were relying on things such as like the stars, different maps that were inadequate. They were relying on things that were not the best kind of indicators of direction. And LaSalle overshot it. So he was intending to go right up to the Mississippi River to around where Plaquemines Parish was. But what he did is he went a little farther. So let's say that, I'm going to show you this picture. You can see it. It's in page 96 in your textbook. As you can see, he wanted to land here. This is where LaSalle originally wanted to go because that's where he had set up that original kind of first thing. But he didn't have very good navigation. And so he ended up actually over here, right around Texas. And the name of the ship was called La Belle, which is the Beauty. And it's actually in a Texas museum here in Austin. I've seen it. It's very small for the amount of people that were supposed to be on it. But anyway, he overshot where he was supposed to go. And he was like, okay, well, I guess we're just going to have to find somewhere around here to establish things. Well, he goes there, and the Native Americans are not like the Native Americans that are over in Louisiana. These were Comanches and Apaches and serious people that were not playing around. Okay, so when he got to Louisiana, he had the Tunica and, other Native American groups that were not necessarily, oh, hi, welcome, but they weren't as aggressive as the Apaches or the Comanches or Attakapas. These were serious troops, serious tribes that were seriously going to defend their area. So when LaSalle and his men came, these Native Americans were like, you are wrong. You cannot stay here. So he comes in here and his men are being attacked like right and left by the Native Americans. So they need to go and they're like, oh my gosh, we got to get out of here. What happens though? The Belle sinks. He hits something coming in. So his ship is gone. So the only way that LaSalle thinks like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get back to Louisiana is to walk there. And that's what he was going to do. He's like, hey, listen, I got a great idea. He tells his men, we're going to walk there. It can't be too far off. I know where I'm going. It's kind of like when I was growing up, my dad would never say, like, ask for directions. He would be like, oh, I know where to go. And, I don't know, some of you may have had that situation, or your mom or your dad or whomever may be like that. But that's LaSalle. He's like, I don't need help. We're going to get there. We're just going to walk. Well, throughout the walk around the coast of Texas, back all the way to New Orleans, the mouth of the Mississippi, Plaquemines area, you can imagine what they came across. They had lots of angry tribes. They had lots of diseases. They had lots of things happening to them. They didn't have the proper food. They were getting sick. They were being picked off one by one. So LaSalle's men, they say, hey, y'all, look. We can't go anymore. We can't do this. This guy doesn't know where he's going. So one day they had one guy go up to LaSalle and pretend that he was just like talking to him, say, hey, I got a question, blah, blah, just to kind of keep him occupied. And then someone else went right back to LaSalle and shot him point blank in the head and killed him. And they threw him in the water or something. Something happened to his body. I don't know. And then they just either ran off to, live with another colony, or I don't know, they all scattered. Okay, so his own men, LaSalle was killed by his own men for his ineptitude. So there was mutiny on the Bounty at that time. That's a good movie if you want to watch that one. I do like that one. It's really old though, but that makes it even better. So France starts, they say, okay, where's LaSalle? The king's like, where is he? Well, I don't know where he is. And so people are saying, but we need somebody to come and help us because he left us here in this area, which would be known as Louisiana, and he never came back. We need somebody to come help us. They are not coming back. Like kind of think about this. If you're like my kids, they have chores that they have to do on Saturday and they act as though it's like torture, and it's nothing. It's things like clean your room and take out the garbage. And they act as though I'm telling them that they need to go and like build buildings or something. But anyway, they always say, Kate, or Belle will say, Kate, can you bring me this? Or Kate, help me do this. Or Belle, one of them asks for another one's help, and they're sitting there and they're waiting, and their sibling never comes back. That happens all the time. And so I hear them upstairs saying, get back here, where are you? And things like that. Same thing was going on with the French establishment that LaSalle had begun. They were saying, he came, he kind of claimed it, he left us here, and now we don't really know what we're going to do. And if no one comes to help us, we're all going to die. So the French sends these two brothers. Okay, now one brother, he's the older one, his name is Iberville. He's a very big go-getter. He's a really very, I guess, very kind of like goal-oriented brother. He does what he needs to do. He follows the directions. He does everything. He's there. He's going to make it happen. So he goes there with a bunch of ships and a bunch of people and a lot of supplies, and he brings his younger brother, Bienville, with him. Now, their names were not Iberville and Bienville. That was just kind of their titles. Their names were really Pierre, isn't that pretty? And Jean-Baptiste, that were their names. So they come over here to this area that LaSalle had colonized, and they bring all of these supplies with them, and they say, okay, we are going to set up the first kind of really permanent French settlement over here in the area that is now going to be known, well, it was Louisiana. So what they did is they called it, let me see, I was wanting to see, we did that. What tell you about one? Okay, so they settled Fort Maurepas, and what they did here is because this was the fort that they were going to establish at the mouth of the Mississippi, based on LaSalle's kind of trip. So Iberville goes, he establishes the Fort Maurepas, and then he says, I've got to go back, because he realizes that there is a lot that needs to go into establishing a colony in this just terrain that is something they had never experienced in their lives. He needed to go back. So he said, okay, little brother, I'm going to put you in charge. I'm going to go back to France. You stay in charge. You're the one that's got to make sure things run correctly. Well, Bienville is the younger brother. And as Iberville is kind of like, your goal-getter, your success-oriented, the one that's going to get things done, Bienville is your fun-time guy. So Iberville leaves, and he has this fort, and he says, okay, Bienville, you're in charge. And Bienville's like, all right, bye. My turn now. And so all of the kind of established procedures and things that Iberville had put into place, Bienville slowly kind of picks away at them to the point where France says, you need to be removed. You are not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And we are going to continue with that in class. So on Tuesday's class, we're going to talk about the reasons that the Europeans wanted to establish colonies in what would become Louisiana. And then on Thursday's class, we're going to talk about Iberville, Bienville, and the eventual proprietorship that has to follow to kind of finance Louisiana. So that's all I've got for you. I will see you in class, and until next time on the Miss Myra Show, bye!
Flora's public drive is next.
Okay, let's go.
Let's go. Flora goes around the first corner correctly, but then things start falling apart.
Okay.
Now you're basically stopped at a green light, so...
Flora doesn't communicate with other drivers.
Okay, did you signal in when you changed lanes?
No.
She doesn't know which lane she's in.
So if you're going to turn left, which lane should you be in?
Left lane.
So do you know that you're not in the left lane?
I might. Oh, I'm.
And she can't recognize a two-way street.
This is 2 lanes. You need to give him enough room.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Flora now assumes she's at a 4-way stop. Bad assumption.
Chloe, I should go.
Well, no, well, stop. This is not a 4-way. This is not a 4-way. He doesn't have a stop sign. Do you see a stop sign for him?
But if there's one mistake that Flora makes more than any other, it is.
You're stopped at a green light. You're stopped at a green light?
Yes.
Yes.
Flora stops at almost every intersection.
Now we're stopped at a green light again. We're stopping at a green light again.
I've seen glaciers move faster than her.
Now the Glacier wants to turn right.
You're stopped dead in the middle of the road.
Without checking to her right, Flora tries to make the turn.
And now you turned across the lane into front of this person. Did you look where you were going when you turned there?
No.
A few blocks later, Flora misses her turn, which means
You have to get back onto James Street so you're able to turn right on King Street West. That is very close to that bus.
Sorry.
to get back on track, Flora gets into a clearly marked right turn lane, but she wants to go straight through the oncoming traffic of a bus depot.
Well, that big red circle with the big slash means no entrance.
How can I get out?
Flora doesn't get out. Not right away, at least. But after 30 seconds, she does manage to get turned 90 degrees, and she drives along the crosswalk.
Sorry. You go ahead. Okay.
A few minutes later, Flora wants to turn right, but
Can I turn? No.
she thinks this arrow on a real estate sign indicates a one-way street.
One way.
A few minutes after that, Flora misunderstands another sign.
Where are you going? You have a red light.
Change right.
You see that sign right in front of you?
Yeah.
What does that sign say?
Both these signs say you can't turn right on a red light.
We're right in the middle of the crosswalk. Don't
I'm
move.
sorry.
Don't move.
Just wait a minute.
You know what I can't stand? I can't stand it when people drive on the wrong side of the road, which is what Flora's doing now.
Okay. So do you see that yellow line there? This means that you're in the oncoming traffic lane.
Right.
That car is facing you
Oh my
because you're
God.
in his lane. Oh my God, is correct.
I'm really not looking forward to being on the highway with Flora.
That's a red light. You're going right in through an intersection in the middle of a red light.
I'm the worst driver. There is quite several close calls. I feel I'm quite close to the dice.
Kevin doesn't have a clear understanding of where